Welcome to brought to you by OraSure Technologies. OraSure Technologies is a global leader in oral fluid substance abuse testing products. Their unique assays provide accurate and easy-to-administer testing methods to help determine the presence or absence of drugs of alcohol in a person's system. Oral fluid products provide a simple collection process, faster results, cost savings, with minimal risk of tampering and dramatically reduced risk of adulteration. The oral fluid drug test is an FDA-cleared laboratory-based oral fluid drug testing system that enables accurate testing for drugs of abuse, including marijuana, cocaine, PCP, amphetamines, and opiates. With a fast and easy-to-administer collection process, Intercept is ideal for workplace, criminal justice, drug treatment centers, and clinical setting screening programs, among others. It is entitled Workplace Cotinine Testing is Legal, Affordable, and Popping Up Everywhere, and will be presented by Bill Curran and Cheryl Rutledge, the president and founder of WFC & Associates, a national consulting firm that specializes in drug testing policy development and providing accurate and up-to-date state drug testing law information. He is the author of the online Ultimate Guide to State Drug Testing Laws at statedrugtestinglaws.com, and the publisher of the e-newsletter State Drug Testing Laws Monthly, and the weekly e-news Drug Testing in the News. He's author or co-author of 10 books on substance abuse issues, including Why Drug Testing. He is also admitting the annual drug testing industry survey, now in its 15th year. Cheryl Rutledge is the Director of Occupational Health Services for Grinnell Regional Medical Center. With over 25 years of experience in health and wellness, she leads GRMC's wellness efforts for its own employees, as well as providing pre-employment and wellness services for area employers. Grinnell Regional Medical Center is recognized as a well workplace at the gold level by the Wellness Council of Iowa. It will now be our pleasure to hear from Bill Curran and Cheryl Rutledge.
Thank you very much, Jessica, and it's a pleasure to be speaking on another in the monthly series of webinars hosted by OraSure Technologies. As Jessica was reading the information about OraSure, this particular slide was on the screen, and of course the device that you're looking at there is not the Intercept device, but actually the Cotinine, the oral fluid collection device for Cotinine testing. So we're going to talk about that in more detail a little bit later. But I just wanted to express appreciation to OraSure as well as Cheryl Rutledge for today's webinar. I'm really excited to be presenting with Cheryl Rutledge as I consult with one another on the content for today's webinar. I just am fascinated with some of the experiences that she's had in the field actually administering Cotinine testing programs. And so I'm looking forward to her part of the presentation. We're going to set the a little bit, really, for Cheryl's part of the presentation. We're going to talk some of the latest statistics, particularly as they affect the workplace. We'll get into some state law issues as well. We'll talk about the benefits of Cotinine testing programs and the advantages of oral fluid testing for Cotinine. Talk a little bit about the Affordable Care Act and how it ties into workplace smoking cessation programs and other types of programs that incentivize employers as well as employees in this particular area. Now, there are some things that all of us know. First of all, we probably all know that smoking is bad for your health. It can lead to multiple diseases that can cause, and other things, of course, death. If anybody doesn't know that now, at least in the United States, it's because they don't want to know it. But that's out there now. It's common knowledge, and you really take your life into your own hands if you choose to be a smoker. It's an expensive habit to have, no question about it. The average smoker will light up about 13 to 16 cigarettes a day, which comes out to about 4 or 5 packs a week. I've never smoked in my life, so I don't have firsthand knowledge of the cost of smoking, but I did a bit of research on it. I found that the average smoker spends about $1,500 or more on cigarettes. And in New York City, where a pack of cigarettes can cost as much as $13 compared to the national average of just under $6, The average smoker can spend over $3,000 a year on cigarettes. I remember growing up in a household where my parents smoked, and my father was in the Navy, and they would go to the commissary on the weekend and come home with cartons of cigarettes, with packs of cigarettes, and that would hold them over for however long it was. Now, I developed the habit of smoking myself, costly though, as I pointed out, on an individual basis, as well as overall, $133 billion in annual cost to the U.S. economy. About half of it, in lost productivity, and the other half, of course, the obvious healthcare-related expenditures. And so we're going to talk about the effects of smoking in the workplace, but it's clear employers have a vested interest in workers who are not smokers, and cotinine testing in particular, either as part of a wellness program or some type of employee screening program, can employers achieve those objectives. So, some of the latest statistics. Smoke contains nearly 5,000 chemicals, 69 of which are known to cause cancer. You may know that cigarette smoking can cause cancer, but there are lots of different ways it can cause cancer. And it's directly responsible for a huge percentage of lung cancer deaths, a huge percentage of emphysema and chronic bronchitis deaths. I mean, just the majority by any measurement. Among the adults who smoke, 70% started smoking 18 younger, 86% 21 or younger, which that when you start smoking at that young of an age, it becomes a habit quickly, and it's really, really a difficult thing to break that addiction. Among current smokers, you've got chronic lung disease accounts for 73% of smoking-related conditions, and even when a smoker quits, chronic disease accounts for 50% of smoking-related conditions. So it can have long-term effects even for the fortunate ones who are able to kick the habit. Smoking harms nearly every organ in the body and is, of course, the main cause of lung cancer, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and other illnesses as well. So a lot of stuff. You'll notice source at the bottom. This information on this slide comes from the American Lung Association. I thought to be a great source of information on smoker statistics and the effects of smoking individually, as well as some of the sort of more universal statistics. So if you're interested in that, that's a good website to go to. Now, the cost to employers can be pretty high. The average cost to a private employer, this is not counting public employers, okay, but in the U.S., is an extra $5,800 per year compared with a non-smoker. Okay, it comes from a collection of studies on the cost of smoking. According to research done through Ohio State University, they made it the largest smoking-related cost, over $3,000 annually, from employees taking smoking breaks. The typical smoker will take 5 breaks a day to just the traditional 3 breaks, a break in the morning, a lunch break, and then a break in the afternoon. They're usually going to take a couple more breaks, some perhaps more than that, but that's where a significant amount of money is lost in lost productivity. And so as you can see in that third bullet, the second largest cost, somewhat predictable, over $2,000 in excess health care expenses. So, there's a little bit left in that average cost for things like absenteeism and lost productivity while you're on the job, let alone the lost productivity while you're taking your breaks and your extra breaks to smoke. Now, basic facts about quitting smoking, and there's really nothing bad that can come from quitting smoking, but it's important to understand this. Nicotine is the ingredient in cigarettes that actually causes addiction. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in detail, but smokers become physically addicted to nicotine, and then they tend to hang around other smokers. They tend to be in social environments where other people are smoking, and that makes it even more difficult to kick the habit. In 2009, this was the recent data I could find for this particular point. There were about 50 million adults who were former smokers in the United States. A little over 46 million who were current adult smokers. Now, this estimate comes from the American Lung Association website, but from government statistics. So they're counting youth remember we talked about the significant percentage of adult smokers started smoking before the age of 18 or younger. And that's not counting any of those. So about 46% of the 46.6 million current adult smokers, actually stopped at least one day in the last year, part of an effort to try to quit smoking. A big percentage of people who smoke are stopped. And oftentimes, the requires multiple attempts before somebody can have some long-term and consistent success. A lot of things out there that are available now to help with smoking cessation. There are counseling programs. There are medications that are available. In fact, if you look at that fourth slide down, there are actually 7 medications approved by the FDA to smokers quit, from nicotine patches and gum lozenges to nasal sprays and inhalers. There's also other things out there now that are taking advantage of the technology of our day. Of course, telephones have been around a long time, but texting counseling has proven to be somewhat effective as well in helping smokers stay true to their commitment to stop smoking. In fact, I think the next slide, this is an example of a texting support program that's available to people trying to kick the habit of smoking. It's called Kickbutts 2.0. This program actually delivers personalized text messages. So the person who's trying to stop smoking, I should say, can get encouragement and support through this texting program, but they can also customize certain words, keywords that they want to come to them if they indicate that they're facing a big temptation, they're tempted to slip up or relapse. The system is actually set up to help them with words that they have programmed themselves, and it's there immediately to help them. So this is one example. This is a good one. Our source on that is Agile Health, and I would suggest visiting their website as well to find out more information about Kickbutts 2.0 and some other programs that they have available through Agile. But this is an example of taking advantage of the various technologies that are out there now to help people quit smoking every way possible. And there are other programs out there as well. The bits of smoking cessation are the things that you can quickly imagine. Lowering the risk of lung cancer and other types of cancer, reducing the risk of coronary heart disease, stroke, et cetera, et cetera. But third bullet was really interesting to me. Smoking cessation reduces respiratory symptoms such as coughing, wheezing, shortness of breath. You've heard the expression a smoker's hack or smoker's cough, and some people who are lifetime smokers, just that happens. It's one of the side effects of smoking. And so when you stop smoking, some of those things actually stop, they go away, or they're simply reduced. And the rate of decline in lung function is slower among people who quit smoking. I mentioned my parents were smokers. My mother actually stopped smoking through a company-sponsored cessation program at least 25 years ago. She was a daily, multiple-pack smoker, and she just got fed up with it one day, and she went into a program that was offered through her employer, and she was able to successfully kick the habit through this workplace smoking cessation program. And now, bless her heart, she's well into her 80s and in pretty good health, actually. Physically, she's in great health. But I have to think that stopping smoking 25 years ago obviously had a great deal to do with where she's at now in terms of her health. The other very, very positive side effects that can come from smoking cessation, for when their reproductive years, it reduces the risk of infertility, and during pregnancy, it can reduce the risk of having low birth weight babies. And so nothing but positive comes from that. Now, some of you may be concerned because you've heard this, that, or the other thing in terms of what rights you have as an employer, or you may be in the drug testing business or in the healthcare business, and you've heard things about this as well, and you're wondering how to counsel companies that you work with. Okay, so low down when it comes to cotinine or nicotine tobacco testing in the workplace. There's really only one state that actually prohibits workplace testing, and that's South Carolina. And I'm talking testing for cotinine/nicotine. One state, South Carolina. There are other legal considerations. There are other types of laws that you have to take into account. Chief among them is smoker rights laws. Most have a smoker's rights law, and you have to be aware of that and what it does specifically as it relates to employers and what employers can do. Privacy laws come into play. There's an argument that some portions of the Americans with Disabilities Act comes into play as well, and you can see how a winning argument can be made for that. So to me, the big question really is, what can an employer do with the information when somebody tests positive for cotinine? Now, there are a lot of states, and I'm going to give you 3 examples, just 3 of many, that have specific language in their smoker protection, their smokers' rights laws, that have a direct impact on an employer's ability to act upon a positive cotinine test result. In Colorado, for example, is, well, I'll paraphrase, I'll just read this first one to you. It shall be a discriminatory or unfair employment practice for an employer to terminate the employment of any employee due to that employee engaging in any lawful activity off the premises of the employer during working hours, unless A and B apply. And I point out because Colorado is a particular state with some really interesting things going on there right now in terms of individuals' rights to smoke. And in particular, as you may be aware, Colorado last November passed a law, the vote passed a law that made the use of marijuana legal in the state. There are some limitations. There's parameters that apply, age limits, the amount that you can purchase at any given time, et cetera, et cetera. Lots and lots of parameters. But it's a state where it's now legal to use marijuana. And you can see how in this particular statutory language, law activity is not just, smoking cigarettes, it's also smoking pot now. As long as they're doing it off the premises of the workplace during non-working hours, there are limitations on what an employer can do about that. In Illinois, it takes it one step further. It shall be unlawful for an employer to refuse to hire or to discharge any individual because the individual uses lawful products off the premises of the employer during non-working hours. So Illinois, it adds that pre-employment portion to the smoker's right law. And then in Mississippi, it shall be unlawful for any public or private employer to require the condition of employment that employee or applicant, there's the pre-employment aspect again, for employment, abstain from smoking or using tobacco products during non-working hours. So you can't require it of them. Now, there are things going on at the federal level that will have an impact on laws, and to some extent how they get interpreted in the workplace. And so let's a little bit about the test process itself, why it would be important to consider a smoker or a tobacco testing program. Now, I promised you some information about the Affordable Care Act. Some people call it Obamacare. Section 2713, okay, that important number to keep in mind. If you're going to go in and try to read the Affordable Care Act, I wish you luck. It is thousands of pages of information. It's dense legalese. We've pulled out some critical components. There's a lot more to it than this. I apologize. It would take hours of a webinar to actually cover it all in great detail. But let me touch on a couple of things here. In Section 2713, this is the Public Health Services Act, okay, as added by the Affordable Care Act. It actually requires, and I put that in bold red letters, okay, it requires that a group health plan and a health insurance issuer offering group or individual health insurance coverage, here's the key, provide benefits for and prohibit the imposition of cost-sharing requirements with respect to evidence-based items or services that have, in effect, a rating of A or B in the current recommendations of the United States Preventive Services Task Force. You know, federal government, they love to use acronyms, okay? So the USPSTF. Usually they try to come up with an acronym that, by some convoluted way, it's like a word. doesn't sound like a word, but I'd love to speak to somebody in the federal government, pronounce that acronym, because they always find a way to do it. But if a certain type of activity is rated an A or a B, then this requirement upon group health plans and health insurance issuers comes into effect. Now, second bullet, according to the USP STF's A-rated recommendation for counseling to prevent tobacco use and tobacco-caused disease strongly recommends that clinicians screen, that's the operative word here, all for tobacco use and provide tobacco cessation interventions for those who use tobacco products. And then finally, at the end, again, it talks about recommendations, go to the state, the tobacco cessation counseling interventions, including screening. And there are ways that you can screen, of course, but that would include cotinine testing. Brief counseling and other pharmacotherapy have proven to increase tobacco abstinence rates. And talked a little bit about what we talked about earlier, telephonic support, texting would be in there as well. Okay, with that in mind, with an understanding about the requirement and how it applies to tobacco use, health insurance providers may, and that's the word that's used in the statute, may vary premium rates for insurance coverage in these two categories, in the individual and small group markets, based on family size, geography, and age and tobacco use within certain parameters and limits, okay? Now, I'm going to ask one. It's a little bit complicated. These rules go on to state that a health insurance issuer in the small group market may impose the tobacco rating factor under Section 2701 only in connection with a wellness program. That's the requirements under Section 2705. Allowing a tobacco user the opportunity to avoid paying the full amount of the tobacco rating factor, that extra premium, if they'll participate, or I should read it here, by participating in a wellness program. Meets the standards set by Section 2705, Section J, subsection J. Okay? So there's incentives in there that affect the health insurance issuer as the individuals who are smokers. Okay? Those are financial-driven incentives. And there are lots of examples out there right now because as the Affordable Care Act, this kind of it comes into play in 2014, you're going to see a lot of premium differentials out there. Offers from insurance issuers, employers want to tap into that and may be required to do so. You're already seeing it now, obviously, as we are in and approaching the open enrollment season, these premium differentials, okay? And there's lots of different ways to determine whether somebody is a smoker, okay? You can ask them, of course, and a lot of wellness programs do ask that during an assessment program, and the employer will sign some type of a document that says they're a non-smoker or a pledge not to be a smoker. And self-reporting works. I mean, it is one of the ways that you can put people on record either as being a smoker who's willing to stop smoking or someone who claims not to be a smoker. And premium differentials can be significant. I mean, in one case, I found an example of one as high as 20%. Maybe you're aware of some that are even more. But we probably will see these health insurance premiums total premium differential maybe even increasing next year under the Affordable Care Act. Okay. Now, the deterrent effect of random testing, whether in the drug testing business or you're thinking about cotinine testing, can be fairly significant in terms of verifying abstinence, of course, as well as keeping people honest. People who sign a non-smoking pledge or declaration, plus it's difficult, but a random testing program for smokers can kind of help them along that way. Now, here's an example of a premium differential program from Metis Wellness Services in Texas. You can see there are a lot of employees, over 15,000 different hospitals. In 2011, they adopted the oral fluid collection device for cotinine screenings. They conducted over 13,000 cotinine tests that year in a 12-week period, during that, probably most of it during that open enrollment period. And in 2012, a little over 14,000 cotinine tests. Under their system, the Methodist Wellness Services system, employees and spouses as well, who complete health risk assessment, a biometric screening, and test negative for cotinine can save $500 on an individual health plan and up to $1,000 for a family health plan. That's fairly significant. And actually, quite a number of employees who, in 2011 program, agreed to what they call the commit to quit from during their health risk assessment after testing positive for cotinine. So they tested positive, but they went into a commit to quit program to stop using cigarettes. So there's one example. Cheryl's going to be able to share some others with us. But I keep using the term cotinine testing, and some of you may not be familiar with that. Maybe you've heard of tobacco testing or nicotine testing. So let me clarify the verbiage here. Nicotine is, psychoactive ingredient in cigarettes that actually causes addiction. So, if you've been on any of the webinars I've done in the past on marijuana with this trend that's going on, we talk about THC, psychoactive ingredient in marijuana. Nicotine is that ingredient in cigarettes, and it's the addictive property in cigarettes. Cotinine, on the other hand, is a metabolite of nicotine. It's a major metabolite. And cotinine testing is usually the test of choice to evaluate tobacco use or some exposure to tobacco because it's stable. And it's only produced when nicotine is actually metabolized. So the present cotinine is a surefire way to tell whether somebody has been either using tobacco products or they've been exposed to it. And I want to point this out. This is important. That's why I put it in all caps. Testing doesn't actually determine a person's health. You can't use it to determine a person's ability to perform a specific work-related task. That's when you possibly can start getting into trouble with the ADA. It does test to determine the presence of nicotine. When cotinine is present, that is, as a metabolite of nicotine, it means that the person has either been smoking or they've been around a lot of cigarette smokers. Okay. Now, cotinine testing a lot of different ways in the workplace. Part of a cessation program. You can do it as part of an employment screening program. As I talked about during with the Methodist Wellness Services program, as an evaluation for applicants to a health or a life insurance program, as well as part of a health and a wellness program. And so it can fit in a lot of different areas. It can be based on blood, urine, saliva, or hair. However, I will point out that with blood, urine, and hair, those are very complex scientific tests, and to do them would require services of a professional biometric service provider at an off-site laboratory. So you may not want to go to that time and that expense. That's where saliva-based testing comes in. It is a much easier test to administer. Individuals in your employment or that work for your clients, they can actually be trained to administer the test. In the case of Orshore Technologies, our host today, they actually manufacture a laboratory-based cotinine test for urine, serum, and for oral fluid samples, but it is sort of the test of choice when it comes to testing for cotinine. They also offer an instant result test as well. The one that I was talking about, the Orshore oral specimen collection device, is what you use to collect the saliva sample and then send it to a laboratory so you can have a lab-based result. But if timing of the result is important to you, you can also opt for the instant result device as well, and Cheryl will talk about those in a minute. Now, the advantages to oral fluid testing are fairly significant when you compare them to other testing modalities. The test can actually be administered 4 to 7 days after tobacco use. That means the window of detection, cotinine testing with oral fluid, is 4 to 7 days. By comparison, it's relatively inexpensive. Most people consider providing a saliva sample to be non-invasive compared to urine and certainly compared to blood. And the collection takes place every single time. The donor and the administrator are standing side by side. They're never out of one another's sight. There's no possibility of any kind of tampering of the specimen. If with the rapid test, you can have a result within 15 minutes. Okay, with the lab-based result, you're usually going to have a result within about 24 hours of the time that the lab receives the sample. Okay, but the testing device comes with instructions, so it's fairly easy to administer the test anybody can be trained to do it. You may have a lot of questions about it. OraSure has developed a very helpful guide called Testing for Tobacco Use Frequently Asked Questions. At the end of the presentation, after Cheryl's part, and when we go into the question and answers, I'm going to put up some information that you can use to either call or email OraSure, and they would be happy to help you out with sending you a copy of that FAQ device or manual. Now, I do want to talk about window of detection just for a moment because this comes up a lot in any type of testing scenario, but in particular with cotinine testing, because there's a lack of information out there generally, and that's why we're doing this webinar today. First, that cotinine is what we call a first-stage metabolite of nicotine. The window of detection for nicotine itself is pretty short, about 2 hours. But with cotinine as a metabolite of nicotine, the window of detection is extended for several days. And that's what makes it a preferred method for screening for tobacco use. At a cutoff level of 30 nanograms per milliliter, an individual could possibly test positive for up to 4 to 6, 7 days. Whereas with a test nicotine, we're talking about hours. And I may have said days earlier, but it's just hours. So I apologize for any confusion on that. Testing for nicotine, approximately 2 hours. Testing for cotinine, you're talking about a window of detection of several days. Now, the two products that are available from OraSure, this is a little bit of the commercial aspect of today's presentation. There's the OraSure Oral Specimen Collection Device. That's the device that's pictured there. That's what you use to collect a saliva sample and send it to a laboratory to be analyzed. The collection process just takes a few minutes. The results are usually available within a day, 24 hours, from the time the lab receives the specimen, okay? There are other methods available. You can test with blood or serum, dried blood spots, or urine by the laboratory. But again, as I said, oral fluid is the most convenient, the easiest to administer. It's something that you can do yourself with trained individuals in the work site. An instant result is important to you. There are products on the market, including this one that's available from Intercept. It's called the iScreen Oral Fluid Cotinine Test. It takes about time you start when you have a result, about 10 minutes, okay? And the result that's going to show on that open screen there in the middle of the device above the word cotinine is going to be stable for about an hour, okay? You can, if you go down to test interpretation, line next to the COT, okay, if you look on the results there, on the device, you see COT in all capital letters, which the cotinine in that area indicates a negative test result for cotinine. The absence of a line next to the COT area indicates a presumptive positive, okay? It's a screen. So as an instant result, it gives you some immediate information, but it should be considered a presumptive positive. The detection use device, about 2 days. The shelf life is 24 months, which is fantastic in the world of drug testing with instant use devices. And you can correlation to laboratory is pretty good. 99% or greater specificity and 98% sensitivity. Now, if those terms are new to you, sensitivity is the measure of a test's ability to correctly determine the presence of a drug or what you're testing for, in this case, cotinine. Whereas with with specificity, that's the measure of the test's ability to discriminate between different drugs or different chemicals, whatever it is that you're testing for again. So you can see the correlation to laboratory with the instant test device, very spot on right there, okay? Maybe lab-based result is always the preference, but if you need an instant result, this is the go. Now, I'm going to turn the microphone theoretically over to my co-presenter today, Cheryl Rutledge from Grinnell Regional Medical Center in Iowa, who has a lot of hands-on experience with this. I think you're going to really like what she has to share today. Cheryl?
Good. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I want to spend some time as part of my presentation to describe our use of the cotinine testing in real-life situations. I'm going to explain first, we're a hospital, so we're a bit unique. On one hand, we're an employer and we're interested in the wellness and the health of our employees. On the other hand, we provide occupational services to employees in our area. So we have kind of a two-handed kind of experience with our cotinine testing. And you know, Bill, you talked a lot about the HIPAA and the Affordable Care Act and how it works with the wellness programs. I want to just talk about our experience a bit. from our experience as an employer, and I want to start there, we've worked for about 10 years on really developing our wellness program with our hospital employees. And for us, that's each year gets a little bit more advanced and a little bit tougher maybe to succeed. And I want to really emphasize we don't just look at tobacco. We also look at nutrition and exercise and stress management and all kinds of things. But as Bill mentioned on slide 21, it's really important to consider tobacco as part of that wellness program. It allows us to kind of up the incentive, if you will, by 20%, anything we're doing to encourage people to take better care of themselves. If tobacco isn't part of, or tobacco cessation isn't part of a wellness program, we can offer about 30% incentive, whether it's off the premiums or off the total cost of the employee health plan. If we add tobacco, we can add another 20% for a total of 50% of the cost of a healthcare program. We can incent for the employee to become more open to looking at those health behaviors. So for us, tobacco has always been a really important part. We started a few years ago asking the employee to sign a pledge that they hadn't used tobacco products in 6 months previous to the signature, and we also did a CO test. So we looked at carbon monoxide. We used what was called a smokalizer, and we looked at presence of carbon monoxide in the breath. We always kind of fudged the results. We told the people that they had to be tobacco free for 6 weeks for it to show up. It actually was more like a couple of hours, but it's all we had. And then last year we started looking at saying, we wanted a little bit more concrete. We looked at doing some nicotine testing in the blood, and even for us in the hospital business, it was hugely expensive. It was in the $200 range per person to have nicotine tested in the blood. We don't do it in our hospital. We would have to send it out. And once again, as Bill mentioned, we had a 2-hour window. So it really wasn't measuring anything any better for us than carbon monoxide testing was. And so I started doing some exploration over the internet and found the cotinine testing. Looked at it from a variety of aspects, talked with our lab director which would be best. We decided the oral swab would be the least invasive, the best way to get the product out there, and very inexpensive compared to the nicotine testing. So we started doing it at the beginning of 2013. We love it. It's easy for people to perform. It's non-invasive. We do some blood testing for lipid levels and stuff as part of it. They come to the lab, they sit down to have their blood drawn, and while they're at it, we do the swab. So really, really simple to perform. We chose the non-instant. We chose to send ours in. It kind of takes away the employer looking over your shoulder bit, that it comes back from a neutral lab. Nobody that's an employee is reading somebody else's, another employee's results. But we've been really, really happy with it. We've found some people who have previously pledged that they were, and part of the reason we thought this was important was we wanted to focus not just on tobacco or cigarette smoking. And when we dealt with carbon monoxide, that's all we were dealing with. We wanted to progress so that we were dealing with smokeless tobacco and some of the new addictions that we're seeing in our employees, which is they've become addicted to a nicotine replacement substance. So nicotine gum they're chewing all of the time. They've even just transferred their addiction to the e-cigarettes and the nicotine things in there. So the cotinine allowed us to be able to test for the presence of nicotine and to actually start those conversations about the nicotine replacement addictions as well. We've liked a lot. We've found a few positives who previously swore to us that they didn't use tobacco. And one of the things, going clear back to the laws and stuff, one of the things with a bona fide wellness program, such as ours is, that has an outcome-based or a health contingent focus, which tobacco use is, you have to provide a reasonable accommodation. It allows us to have that conversation with the employee. Okay, you've tested positive. Now you need to have reasonable accommodation, and what is that? For us, it's that they have to go through a tobacco cessation program. They don't have to quit. We can't require that, but we can require that they complete the program. It's been extremely important as part of our plan to find this. It's measurable. It just has given us that second loop. Secondly, then, what we do is we provide services to outside companies, to other employers, for both pre-employment, for any occupational needs, for random testing, for workers' compensation, all of those kind of things. And we've just started having some employers ask us to also provide cotinine testing to applicants for their jobs as part of the pre-employment testing. So I talked to them about, what are you going to do with that information? What are you interested in discovering? And at this point, they're simply just interested in knowing who uses tobacco products and who doesn't. But it's out there, that kind of need for starting to speculate, how can we best use this product to engage our employees in a changing behaviors sort of method. So those are kind of the two ways we use it. I'm certainly open to questions. If you've got anything that you think I need to add to that.
Cheryl, very interesting. Now, you're offering the service obviously internally, but
Yes.
as well as a service to employers in the community. So how well is it going over among employers in the community? Is there a growing interest in cotinine testing?
There's a growing interest in all kinds of wellness offerings. So from both the small employer to the very large employer, they're starting to explore, partially with the Affordable Care Act coming on board, how can they control their costs. And so they, each month we hear from another employer saying, okay, what can I offer for wellness? For a while, wellness kind of went away, and now it's back in as part of that how do I afford costs. So more and more employers every month are saying, okay, what do you have to offer us, and how do I build that into my program?
Okay. And then another question that came to mind was with employers again, a certain percentage that prefer to administer the test themselves on site, or do they still prefer to have a professional take care of that for them?
Interestingly enough, they've chosen us to do. Typically the employees, the applicants, come to our place of business for their physical, for sometimes a chest X-ray, lots of things, hearing tests, etc. And they've chosen for us to keep that on our site. And
does that? I mean, obviously, I wouldn't ask you to give away pricing or anything, but does that contribute to increased cost doing it that way, or does it sort of even out?
It evens out because typically we'll go into the workforce if we're doing some group testing, and it'll be interesting to see in the next year or two if they add that. We go to a lot of companies and do blood testing, and it'll be interesting to see if they choose this as part of that. So that's more part of their wellness plans versus pre-employment.
Gotcha. And you'll actually administer the cotinine test at the work site as well as individuals coming to you?
You bet.
Okay. Another question, you talked about reasonable cessation programs. Once somebody tests positive or, they admit to being a smoker, and we talked about some state laws that protect smokers' rights, if they're participating in a lawful activity on their own time off company premises. Most state laws would prohibit somebody from, terminating employment or even not, choosing not to hire somebody based on that alone. But then you made the reference to a reasonable cessation program, not being able to force somebody to do it. But what kind of incentives are presented to the individuals to be in a cessation program, what you call a reasonable cessation program?
Our insurance insurance is self-insured, so we can be a little bit different than everybody else, or than people who pay a premium to another company to manage their health costs. But what we've found is people change what we focus on. So when we focus on certain health behaviors, it changes the way people think about those health behaviors. Whether it's stress management or whatever it is, if we focus on it, they focus on it, and they tend to start to make changes. For an employee to know that their health insurance can be 20% less if either one test negative for the use of for the presence of cotinine in their system, or two have completed a tobacco cessation program, that's quite a bit of incentive, and it's interesting. We don't say they have to stop using tobacco. We can't. That's part of the health contingency piece. We also can't say their cholesterol has to remain under 200. There are reasons that those things can't happen. But what we've heard back from our employees is, okay, you made me take Cotinine, Iowa, or some of the other, there's an American lung cessation program they can take, etc. You made me do it, and almost against my will, they talked me out of smoking. So even when they went in as a resistor, they came out and said, now not everyone has quit, but we had those who have quit. We've also had those who said, wow, I don't smoke nearly as much as I used to, based on what I learned and what I heard. So you convinced me when I didn't think I could be convinced. Even for the resistor, there's been extreme value in taking them through that reasonable accommodation.
Let me just kind of that one step further, because that's actually fascinating. So somebody who was not interested in stopping smoking, required to go through a cessation program of some sort. They reluctantly, and yet sometime during the process, something changes, and they actually stop smoking. And obviously, there are some that successfully complete the cessation program, right?
Correct.
So,
and for us, the next year, it happens the same way. The thing about the bona fide wellness programs that both HIPAA and Affordable Care Act talk about is that we have to reoffer the program to everyone on at least an annual basis. So as part of that, next year you come in with a clean slate. You have to do these certain tasks again, and based on what the result is that year, determines whether you, and for some of them, we give them an option of Cotinine, Iowa, the American Lung Association cessation program, and then we also have a cessation program that goes with our employee assistance program. So they get 3 opportunities, and if they came in with something they wanted to try instead of that, and it's a formal recognized program, we'd certainly approve that. And they may take a different one the next year. We haven't had anyone go more than 4 times, 4 years, and that seems like wow, but more than 4 years without changing the behavior.
Interesting.
And, you got to plant the seed a lot of times to change an addiction.
Well, and
getting them that far is great.
Don't you get it to be true, though, that in many cases the individual has always wanted to stop smoking, but it's just such a hard habit to kick that they need that extra help?
Especially now, because society has changed how it looks on tobacco use. In Iowa, at least, there is no smoking in bars. There's no smoking in restaurants. There's no smoking in healthcare settings. There's lots of places where it's not allowed. So they feel a bit more of an outsider if they still have that habit. And seriously, the ones who are still smoking now are we got the low-hanging fruit years ago who it wasn't much of a habit. They didn't have much of an addiction. They've moved on. The ones now, it's tough. And so anything we can do to help encourage that just helps. Yeah.
Now, what about, does secondhand smoke ever come up? Somebody tests positive and they claim, kind of like in the drug testing arena with the workplace, somebody tests positive for marijuana and they claim it was, at a concert or something like that. Does that come up very often when it comes to cotinine testing?
doesn't come up at all with cotinine testing. It's literally a good positive, or it's not. It did come up when we did carbon monoxide testing, and the interesting thing was, in several of the instances, we found levels high enough that suggested they were tobacco users. They swore they didn't, but they had smokers in the house. We talked to them about the health risks of that as well. Even if you're just in the house, look at this. It's as if you were actually smoking yourself. With cotinine, it's been cut and dry. Yes, I use, because we're also interested in the health risks of nicotine itself, not just the smoke piece of it. And we have had 2 employees who have admitted is not the right word, who have talked to us about the cotinine testing, worried that their nicotine gum and their e-cigarettes would show positive, and yes, it will. And they've been said, what do we do? I can't get off the gum. I never thought that was going to be a problem. I didn't do a cessation program. I just went on the gum, and I simply transferred my addiction. So we've sent them through a cessation program as well, because we've simply transferred the risk to something that doesn't involve smoke, and that's great, but still involves nicotine, and that's still got some risk.
Okay. What about other forms of smokeless tobacco, people who chew tobacco, things of that nature? That must come up occasionally also.
It comes up quite often, interestingly enough, more with our spouses than with the people. We're a mostly female population working in a hospital, so that's not usually our drug of choice. But with our spouses, a lot who are part of our wellness program and required to also be tobacco-free or complete the program, and we couldn't catch them before. We do catch them now, and so they go through the program the same as a cigarette user would go through.
Okay. And is there, at least from your experience, Cheryl, is there a difference in the success rate between a person who smokes cigarettes versus somebody who uses smokeless tobacco?
Success rate with the cessation programs?
Yes.
We're not seeing much difference. Interestingly enough, some of the cessation programs weren't quite as ready for the people who use chew or are addicted to the replacement things to come into their program. They were really focused on the cigarette smoking. So they've and we talked to, Quitline Iowa is our Iowa kind of statewide program, and we talked to the providers of it, literally to help prepare them for that, because that's simply the next step. And
I had just one other question. Obviously, you're a big proponent of oral fluid cotinine testing. How did you happen on to oral fluid testing?
The modern way. I was doing an internet search.
Okay.
Literally looking at, my lab director was aware that there's stuff out there, that there are, there's oral tests and those kind of things, and I literally started looking at nicotine testing and came upon the cotinine testing. Got in contact with the people who supply it, and then started looking down the list. Okay, does it meet our lab director's kind of? Does he approve of it? Does it look good from a wellness point of view? What's the data out there that says, how reliable is it? Is it specific and enough for us? And then just kind of walk down the path that way. And looking at cost. Cost was huge for us. We were looking at something relatively inexpensive that still was scientific enough that met our needs.
So your program through Cornell is a combination of both lab-based testing and instant, or does it tend to be one more than the other?
We do the lab-based testing. Simply, we're using the same product for our employees that we use for the employers in the area. We send it in. We chose not to do it in-house. We do collection, but not the results, simply to keep it a bit more for our employees.
Okay. Well, On the screen now in front of you, to our audience, there's the contact information in case you want to contact OraSure regarding their FAQ document, which I referred to earlier. Thank you, Cheryl. That was excellent information. Any questions that Cheryl and I did not get to today, we'll try to go through them and get a response to you, or somebody from OraSure will get back to you. Just in conclusion, and there was a lot of information covered today, and believe me, in putting this slide deck together for today's presentation, there was a lot more information. We could have spent the whole hour just on the Affordable Care Act. We could have spent it on, the testing process, examining the reasons for different cutoff levels, et cetera, comparing the methodologies of instant versus lab-based, and look at ROIs and things of that nature. We chose to take this approach. We hope it was useful information to you. I saw in the question section, though, somebody asking if the slides would be available. The answer to that is yes. Also, the recording of today's webinar will be available as in our archive section if you want to be able to go back and listen to it again. If there were employees or others in your company who you wanted to listen to the information as well, that recording will be available. There were a lot of statistics presented at the very beginning. It does paint somewhat of a stark picture, and the price tag of smoking, especially as it affects the workplace, is significant. There's no way around that. But it's important to understand that there are laws on the books in virtually every state that protects smokers. And so there are some limitations on what an employer can do with a positive test result, what you can do with that information. There are a lot of incentives available now through the Affordable Care Act, or better put, as a result of the Affordable Care Act. Some were already in place, some were starting to be put in place in anticipation of the Affordable Care Act, and then, of course, next year, some of those incentives, especially the premium differentials, may actually increase. Now, cotinine testing is the key to accurately detecting whether somebody has nicotine in their system, which would, in most cases, be a clear indication of smoking. Fluid testing has proven to be a very effective way to detect cotinine in a person's system. It does not, again, say that the individual, not fit for a certain job, or, it doesn't say anything about their current health condition, but it is an accurate way to tell whether somebody has nicotine in their system. If the metabolite cotinine is in their system, that means that they have most likely been smoking. There may be some other explanations, as Cheryl talked about, really not a lot in terms of secondhand smoke and things of that nature. But hopefully today's information has been valuable to you, and it's all going to be available as a follow-up. I'd like to thank Cheryl Rutledge for her great participation and presentation today. It was wonderful co-presenting with her, and also express appreciation once again to OraSure that puts on a monthly series of webinars on all types of subjects related to drug-free workplace issues, drug testing, in this case cotinine testing, all of which affect the bottom line if you're an employer or if you're providing services to employers that they're interested in, because as Cheryl mentioned, they're looking for ways to reduce costs, and this plays a big factor in that going forward, especially beginning in 2014 as the ACA goes into full effect. So thank you for joining us. I'll turn the microphone back over to Jessica.
Thank you, Bill. On behalf of OraSure Technologies, we hope you have found today's presentation informative and helpful. This presentation was recorded, and you will receive instructions informing you how to access the recording. Thank you for your attendance today. This concludes today's webinar.